Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's virtual program, Visas for Life, the story of Jewish refugees, their escape to Japan, and the heroic diplomats who helped them. My name is Avital Borisovsky, and I'm the Director of Communications at Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. Before we begin, please ensure your microphones are muted for the program. If you have any questions or comments during the event, feel free to share them in the chat box, or you can email us after the program. Please note that tonight's presentation from our featured speaker, Akira Kitade, will include closed captioning. To enable the captions, click the More button at the bottom of your screen, click the closed caption button, and then
Mhm.
click the Show Caption button. There should be instructions in the chat box if you run into any technical issues. So I'll start off with saying that tonight's program is especially meaningful to me. It was inspired by a trip I had the privilege of taking this past December to Japan. It was called the Kakehashi Project, which was funded by the Japanese government. And I was part of a group of 5 young professionals from diverse backgrounds. I came as part of the Jewish community. And the program is all about deepening cross-cultural understanding and fostering bridge building between Canadians and Japanese people, and especially in this case,
Mm.
between the Jewish community and the Japanese community. So as we mark both Japanese Heritage Month or Asian Heritage Month, as well as Jewish Heritage Month this May, we're honored to welcome a very special guest.
Okay.
Akira Kitade is joining us live today from Japan, from Tokyo, where it's already Tuesday morning. So following Akira's presentation, we will also hear from Anna Nitoslawska, who will be speaking from Ottawa about her grandfather, Tadeusz Romer, one of several heroic diplomats featured in Akira's book. So please note that Akira will not be answering live questions this evening, but we welcome you to send any questions you have over the chat box as well as over email. You can email our program's lead, Chris Simpson, at csimpson@fswc.ca. And Akira will be responding to questions following the program. So I'll start with introducing Akira Kitade. He was born in Japan in 1944 and worked for the Japan National Tourism Organization. Just before his retirement in 2004, he was given an old photo album by a superior, Tetsuo Osako, who had once escorted Jewish refugees fleeing Europe by ship to Japan. So the album contained photographs of 7 of those refugees, an encounter that sparked Akira's personal quest to uncover their identities and stories. His research culminated in the publication of 2 books, including his latest, Emerging Heroes: World War II Era Diplomats, Jewish Refugees, and Escape to Japan. While many are familiar with the heroic actions of Japanese diplomat Chiun Sugihara, a righteous among the nations who issued transit visas that saved thousands of Jews, Akira discovered that there were other diplomats, both Japanese and non-Japanese, who played critical roles in helping Jewish refugees escape Europe, travel through Japan, and ultimately find safety in new countries. In recognition of his work promoting mutual understanding between Japan and the Jewish community, Akira was awarded the Foreign Minister Commendation in 2017. So please join me in welcoming Akira Kitade.
Thank you, Avital, for your kind introduction. Distinguished audience, it's a great pleasure for me to be given a chance to speak on the occasion of a virtual event sponsored by Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center in Toronto. You probably know Chune Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat who is said to have saved thousands of Jews by issuing them transit visas to Japan against the orders of the foreign ministry in Tokyo. As a Japanese, I have great respect for his courageous action. However, I would like to make it clear that my main focus is not on Chune Sugihara himself, but on what happened to the Jews saved by his visas afterwards. Now, to begin with, let me explain why and how I became involved in research activities of Visas for Life. To be honest with you, as mentioned just now, my primary theme is not Chune Sugihara himself, but my point is how these Jewish refugees reached Japan. It all began when I saw this photo album, which used to belong to my former boss named Tatsuo Osako. It was in 1988. Even today, I cannot forget the excitement I received that day. Mr. Osako was engaged in transporting the refugees from Vladivostok in Siberia to Tsuruga, a Japanese port city, on an old vessel called Amaksa Maru. It was from latter half of 1940 to former half of 1941. My encounter with Mr. Osako dates back to 1966 when I started working for the Japan National Tourist Organization right after graduating from a university in Tokyo. Since I saw this album, the 7 people of the photos occupied a large space in my heart. I thought, when they escaped from Europe, having endured the persecution by the Nazis, they must have fled without food or drinks or a change of clothes. I was amazed that they would give Mr. Osako photos of themselves. Each portrait doubtless a precious possession. Now, I'd like to show you these photos one by one. Each carries handwritten message on the back. Okay. Of the 7, this is the only photo of a man. The handwritten message reads, Mon bon souvenir à mon bon camarade Tatsuo Osako, N. Segalov. Le mars 4 1941. Her handwritten message is in Norwegian. For a Scandinavian woman, faraway Japan would probably have been an unknown land. It made me wonder, what made her write this? In this photo, the message was indeed written in Bulgarian, and it said, From Henny for your memories. This woman with the most serene and calm expression left a message in Polish. It simply says, "Remember me." It includes a date which may read October 2nd, 1940. There's no name signed. This woman's message says, "Remember me" in Polish too. She added, "To the nice Japanese person," showing her gratitude towards Mr. Osako. The signature looks like Rosia, but it's not clear. To be frank, I am most touched by this woman's photo. Perhaps it is because of her haunting expression, which seems to embody the suffering of the Jewish people who were persecuted by the German Nazis. This message is written neatly in French and says, "Avec tous mes sentiments," which means "with all my affection." It is signed Marie. The German message here says, "To dear Mr. Osako, March 22nd, 1941, on Amakusa Maru, Tony Alchu." She's the only one who references the Amakusa Maru by name. What meaning could these words hold? 20 years after my encounter with the Osako album, I decided to visit the United States to trace their footsteps. In September 2020, I met these 8 people who were Sugihara survivors, still alive at that time. This is Mrs. Edith Hammer, who was working as a volunteer guide at the Houston Holocaust Museum. She said, "I was only 3 years old when we arrived in the United States and remember nothing about those days. But a few years later, when I was a little older, my father returned all the money he had borrowed from Jewish refugee supporting organization. I still remember how proud he was." This is Mr. Samir Mansky, who was living in the suburbs of Boston. He said, "I am now suffering from cancer, but I am not afraid of dying at all. I survived a cruel destiny. Besides, I was blessed with my family. I will be 90 next month. This is the life that was saved by Mr. Sugihara." In June 2011, he passed away. He was survived by his son, Charles, who is the professor at the Northwestern University in Chicago. Professor Charles Mansky was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2015. This is Dr. Sylvia Smola, who lives in New York now. She is well known in Japan among the researchers of Sugihara visas, for she generously donated her father's passport to the town of Yaotsu, where Mr. Sugihara was from. This is Mr. Benjamin Fishoff, a bank executive in New York. During our interview, he showed me this picture very proudly and said, "Five sons, 28 grandchildren, and well, oh, I don't remember how many great grandchildren. Sorry." This is Mr. Leo Melamed, whom you all know as the father of the financial futures market. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Japan to see me. His parting words made me feel greatly rewarded. In conclusion, during my visit to the United States, I was not successful in identifying any one of the 7 people in the album. However, at last, this woman was the first to be identified in April 2014. 4 years had already passed since I started to trace their footsteps. She was Zosia Geruter before she fled from Poland and became Sonia Reed after she got married in the United States. She was blessed with 3 children, and furthermore, she was lucky enough to have a chance to come to Japan with her husband in 1979. She was a Sugihara visa recipient. The woman who had left a message in German was identified as Antonina Artura in July 2015, originated from Poland. She came to the United States in 1949 after arriving in Japan in March 1941 and moving to Shanghai, where she was obliged to stay until 1949. She got married and became Antonina Bab. However, unlike Sonia Reed, her life was not a happy one, losing her husband a few years after their marriage. She worked as a librarian from 1955 to 1987 at the University of California, Los Angeles, specializing in Germanic and Scandinavian book collections. She bequeathed her entire estate, which totaled 592,000 US dollars, to UCLA for the Holocaust and Jewish studies. In 1994, she closed her life of 75 years in the loneliness, buried in a Christian cemetery for some reason which is not clear. I cannot but pray, may she sleep in peace. He was identified in September 2015 as Nissim Segalov from Bulgaria. After he came to the United States, he changed his name to Nicholas Sargent. He became a world-famous backgammon player, and at the first international backgammon championship that was held in Bahama Islands in 1964, he was a semi-finalist. However, there was a rumor that in 1980s he was back in Europe and began to haunt the Palace Hotel in Gstaad in Switzerland as a hustler to earn daily life. This woman was identified in September 2015 as Vera Harang from Norway. She turned out to be non-Jewish. Because she was not Jewish, she could have been a victim of the Lebensborn program initiated by the Nazi after Norway was occupied Germany in April 1940. But she was lucky because her mother wisely decided to let her escape from Norway. She obtained a transit visa to Japan at the Japanese embassy in Stockholm. And she was able to come to Japan, being assisted by Mr. Osako on the Amakusa Maru. On arriving at Tsuruga, she went on to Yokohama, where she boarded a Japanese luxury boat called Tatsutamaru. After she arrived in the United States in March 1941, she got married and became Vera Kronberg. She died in 2001 at the age of 84. Now, I'd like to emphasize here that it was thanks to the cooperation of two friends who helped me identify the above-mentioned people. Mr. Mark Halpern, a genealogical researcher living in Philadelphia, United States, and his friend, Mr. Kiyotaka Fukushima, a resident of Chiba Prefecture, Japan. I am very grateful for their help, without which my research would not have progressed so effectively. By the way, in April 2020, something totally unexpected happened. I came across another visa for life issued by another Japanese diplomat. This is a transit visa to Japan issued by the then acting Consul General Nei Saburo in Vladivostok on February 28, 1941. It has been known among the researchers that Nei Saburo issued transit visas, but so far nobody has seen an original one. The recipient of the visa was Simon Korentayer from Poland. His daughter Felicia, 4 years old at that time, is now enjoying a happy life with her big family in California. 2 months after the fund of the Nei visa, a surprising chain reaction occurred. In July 2020, I received a mail from the United States. The sender was Rabbi Aaron Kotler, CEO of Beth Medrash Govoha, a Jewish religious institution in Lakewood, New Jersey. He said, "My mother was also saved by a Japanese diplomat who was not Sugihara nor Nei. His name was Tatekawa Yoshitsugu. Tatekawa was the then Japanese ambassador to the Soviet Union. Just like the case of the Nei visa, some researchers were aware of the existence of the Tatekawa visa, but nobody had actually seen the original one. The recipient of the visa was Richel Friedman from Klaipeda, Lithuania. After Richel received the visa on March 8, 1941, she led a very dramatic life, spending some time in Kobe, Japan, and several years in Shanghai, China. Finally, in 1947, she arrived in the United States, where she got married and became Rachel Kotler. She devoted her life for the development of this Jewish religious institution in Lakewood. Her son, Rabbi Aaron, told me that if his mother had not been able to obtain a Japanese transit visa from Tatekawa, Lakewood would not have prospered into the into the present town. Rochelle passed away in 2015 at the age of 92. Distinguished audience, I hope you have now brought into your knowledge that there were the other Japanese diplomats who saved Jewish refugees. Now I would like to spend some time to refer to the three non-Japanese diplomats who were instrumental in rescuing the Jews during World War II. Firstly, Jan Zwartendijk, Dutch consul in Kaunas, who issued the so-called Krasser visas, which enabled Sugihara to issue Japanese transit visas. In June 2017, I visited Robert Zwartendijk, the second son, at his residence in the suburbs of Amsterdam. He welcomed me very warmly, and what he told me was most impressive. My father was a very private person with a high sense of values, and he never looked for some kind of recognition. The only thing he was interested in was to learn how many people were saved. Sadly, he died in 1976 without knowing the answer. However, on June 15, 2018, a ceremony honoring Jan Zwartendijk was held in Kaunas under the auspices of the city of Kaunas, attended by Dutch King William Alexander and Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė. On September 14, 2023, the Dutch government presented the country's highest honor, the Gold Medal of Honor for Humanitarian Relief. At the presentation ceremony, the then Prime Minister Rutte said in his address. This medal should have been awarded much earlier. Okay. Secondly, NAJ de Vught, Dutch consul in Kobe. He helped 74 refugees land at Tsuruga by providing them with a list certifying that they can enter Curacao without a visa. He was stationed in Kobe as consul from 1934 until 1941, during which period he became across the incident relating to these 74 people. While in Kobe, he had two sons, Yang and Bert, who were born in 1933 and 1934, respectively. They are now living in Australia. Yang remembers that his father used to travel between Tokyo and Kobe very often. He believes that it was related to issuing visas. After the war, the Vught came back to Japan as the Dutch ambassador and stayed in Tokyo from 1960 to 1965. Thirdly, Tadeusz Romer, who was the first Polish ambassador to Japan, stationed in Tokyo from 1937 to 1941. In early 1941, Tadeusz Romer organized a special committee which provided assistance for the refugees to stay in Japan and then helped them obtain visas to their final destinations. He appointed his wife, Zofia, chairwoman of this committee. Several years ago, I attended Professor Eva Paulus Rutkowska's lecture, through which she stressed that the roles played by Tadeusz Romer are very important. And she was kind enough to send me a book titled History of Polish-Japanese Relation that she herself authored. Also, I owe very much to Professor Olga Barbazievich, who published a valuable pamphlet depicting his deeds. It gave me much information about Roma's remarkable contribution he achieved in the history of the rescue of the Jews. Distinguished audience, as a Japanese citizen, I would like to express my profound respect and gratitude to these three diplomats, since I'm convinced that without their efforts, Sugihara's achievement would not have been made possible. Therefore, I strongly wish that studies on the history of the rescue of the Jewish refugees during World War II should be conducted from much wider perspective by focusing on not only Chune Sugihara, but also the other diplomats in the future to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akira Kitade, for that fascinating and moving presentation. While Akira won't be answering live questions this evening, we welcome you to send any questions you may have to the chat box, or you can send us an email emailing our program's lead, Chris Simpson, at csimpson@fswc.ca. And Akira would be happy to answer those questions as soon as possible, and we will get those to you afterwards. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to our next speaker, Anna Nitoslawska. She's the granddaughter of Tadeusz Romer, a key figure Akira just spoke about in his presentation, and who is featured in Emerging Heroes. Tadeusz Romer, the Polish ambassador to Japan during the Second World War, was instrumental in establishing the Polish Committee for Assistance to War Victims, which supported Polish refugees upon their arrival in Japan. Thanks to his efforts, hundreds of destination visas were issued, allowing refugees to find safe haven in countries such as Canada, Australia, and the United States. As described in Akira's book, Romer once told his family, "Jewish or not, ethnic minority or not, as long as they are Polish citizens, I have a duty to protect them." Anna is here to share more about her grandfather's incredible legacy. She will be answering any questions you may have after her presentation, so do feel free to add those to the chat box. Anna, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. And thank you so much, Avital, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you very much to the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for the invitation tonight. And of course, thank you, Kitade-san, for including a chapter about my grandfather, Tadeusz Romer, and his role in the Visas for Life story. Very important comments that you made all along your presentation. So thank you very much for that. My talk tonight, and I do have a couple of slides that I will be sharing as we move along. Is that okay, Avital? Okay. So my talk tonight is going to focus on a relatively short period in my grandfather's diplomatic career. I will be focusing on the period between mid-1940 and mid-1942, when a top priority for the Polish Embassy of the Republic of Poland in Tokyo was actually to help Polish Jewish and Polish refugees reaching Japan, as well as Polish deportees to the Soviet Union. Specifically, my remarks tonight will focus on one, the organization of humanitarian assistance to Polish Jewish refugees with Sugihara transit visas, and two, diplomatic efforts to obtain entry visas to safe destination countries for these refugees. I will then conclude with a few personal remarks. Let me first start, however, by noting that my grandfather, Tadeusz Romer, took up his appointment as ambassador of the Republic of Poland in Tokyo, as Mr. Kitade said, in 1937. That was 2 years before the outbreak of World War II. He was accompanied by his wife, Zofia, and their 3 young daughters, aged 11, 9, and 7. This was a very difficult time politically because of growing danger signs in Europe and the start of Japan's war against China. At the time, Poland and Japan shared a range of mutual interests, among them the need to stand up to the expansionist Soviet Union. My grandfather's mission at the time was to build and maintain good relations between Poland and Japan. Little did he know in 1937 that the friendly relations he successfully developed with the Japanese government and officials in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would prove to be critical in his efforts to support Polish Jewish and Polish refugees arriving in Japan in 1941-42. With the occupation of Poland by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in the east, of course, the Nazi German occupation was coming from the west and the Soviet Union from the east, the government of Poland fled to France initially, and then to London, England, where it continued to function as the government in exile, to which my grandfather reported from the embassy in Tokyo. A few words about humanitarian assistance, but I would just like to run through these slides. As you see, these times were very different. This was an official uniform that my grandfather wore when he presented credentials on his first visit to the Imperial Palace, to the Emperor of Japan. And here there is a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother who appearing in a Tokyo newspaper soon after their arrival in Japan. But in times of war, of course, providing humanitarian assistance to its citizens is a fundamental role of a country's diplomatic post. And so it was in wartime Tokyo. In the middle of 1940, groups of refugees suddenly started to arrive by boat to the port city of Suruga from Vladivostok in the Soviet Union. The refugees were holding visas, transit visas, from Tsuni Sugihara in Kaunas. Nobody knew they were from Sugihara, but they were Japanese transit visas, which allowed them to enter Japan. 97% of these refugees were Jewish, and they had traveled by train for weeks across the Soviet Union. The journey, of course, was very long and strenuous. They were fleeing east to escape the genocide of the Nazis and deportations by the Soviets, leaving behind family, friends, and all of their possessions. Mr. Kitade accurately points out in his book that, and I quote, "Many refugees who landed in the port of Tsuruga didn't know where to go next and did not have enough money to support themselves. They also did not speak Japanese, of course." The task of receiving the refugees and arranging for their accommodation was left in the hands of the then Polish ambassador to Japan, Tadeusz Romer, writes Ewa Pałasz-Rutkowska, a Polish academic expert on Polish-Japanese relations that Mr. Kitade referred to in his presentation. And so my grandfather undertook this task in earnest. He was meticulous and very well organized in his work. His reports to the Foreign Affairs Ministry in London were frequent and regular regarding the unexpected influx of refugees too. Contrary to Vice Consul Sugihara's experience, my grandfather was never instructed to cease aiding the refugees, but the various humanitarian and diplomatic initiatives he undertook were his initiative and his responsibility. His official papers and documents, now mostly
the author, Mr.
now mostly in the National Archives in Ottawa and the Polish National Archives in Warsaw, have allowed researchers and academics to reconstruct events of the time. In one of his reports, my grandfather describes the challenges the embassy faced resulting from the sudden arrival of hundreds of refugees, and I quote, "As a result of wartime financial retrenchment, the embassy, with its reduced staff, was unprepared to meet the needs of the consular needs, especially on a large scale. In most cases, we didn't know in advance the number of displaced persons expected to arrive in Japan. Soviet travel regulations, foreign visa requirements, and ship sailing schedules were constantly changing, rendering even short-term planning very difficult. The refugees often arrived without sufficient documentation to prove their Polish citizenship, making it impossible for them to continue their journey. Because they generally arrived in Japan penniless, the embassy needed to mobilize resources, initially to cover their basic needs and living expenses, and then, of course, costly telegrams, formalities, and other visa formalities at foreign consulates. To address this situation, in October of 1940, my grandfather set up, as both Avital and Mr. Kitade said, the Polish Committee for Assistance to War Refugees, and he appointed his confidant, trusted advisor, and wife, Zofia Romer, as chair. Its objective was specifically to aid and support Polish citizens, no matter their religion or ethnicity. There was to be no distinction between Jewish and non-Jewish Polish citizens, and as a matter of fact, he also wrote a letter addressed to all the consulates and embassies saying so. The committee was also tasked with raising funds to support and to house the refugees in Japan. Committee representatives met the arriving refugees in Suruga to help them with immigration formalities and to arrange for lodging and living expenses. In addition to an office in Tokyo, where the embassy was located, an office was also set up in Kobe, where the Kobe Jewish community had facilities to house the refugees. To carry out its mandate, the committee worked with Jewish organizations in Japan, as well as the American Joint Distribution Committee in New York, and the Committee for Assistance to Jewish Immigrants from Eastern Europe. Financial support also came from private sources of the Polish community in Japan and the United States. Between September of 1940 and October of 1941, the committee raised a little over $120,000, which amounts to approximately $2 million today. Half of that amount came from the American Joint Distribution Committee. Diplomatic efforts. In times of crisis, embassies are often called upon to organize the repatriation of their citizens back to their home country. This, of course, was absolutely impossible in 1940-41, and so my grandfather used his diplomatic skills and contacts to extend refugees' temporary visas with the Japanese authorities when needed, and to secure destination visas for them to safe countries such as Canada. Although the refugees with Sugihara transit visas also had visas to Curaçao, at the time a desolate but militarily strategic Dutch colony in the Caribbean, it was never intended for them to go there. The Polish embassy also provided birth certificates, Polish passports, and other official documents the refugees needed to secure a final destination visa. As of October 1941, a total of 2,185 refugees had arrived in Japan, and 2,077 left Japan for the following destinations, according to the committee's final report to the Polish government in exile. United States, 502. Canada, 259. Palestine, 210. Australia, 84. Burma, now Myanmar, 35. New Zealand, 31. South Africa, 9. Great Britain, 3. That always surprises me personally. Egypt, 3. South American countries, 166, Shanghai, 764, and other countries, 11. All of this, of course, took much effort and much time. Communications were difficult and took a long time. Transportation was dangerous because of the ongoing war. Nevertheless, my grandfather and the consular staff worked tirelessly to arrange safe departures. Oskar Schenker, a Sugihara visa recipient who kept in touch with my grandfather from his home in New York after the war, wrote the following. Ambassador Romer set the example. He was directly involved in every detail related to the destination country. His daily routine consisted of maintaining contacts with various offices, phone calls, and letters to diplomatic missions. When the refugees left Japan by ship, there was always someone from the embassy to bid them farewell and wish them a safe voyage. My grandfather's good relations with Japanese officials and with his British and American counterparts greatly facilitated all of this work. By the middle of 1941, when Germany and the Soviet Union declared war on each other, Japan came under increasing pressure from Germany to break off diplomatic relations with Poland. In October of that year, the Polish embassy in Tokyo was closed. The Romer family, the embassy staff, together with remaining Polish Jewish refugees, were evacuated to Shanghai, where my grandfather, appointed ambassador on a special mission to the Far East, continued to lead work with the Polish consulate to oversee care for the refugees. In August of 1942, there was an exchange of diplomats, and my grandfather, together with his family and staff, left Shanghai on the MS Kamakura Maru, bound for Mozambique. Even then, my grandfather was able to negotiate the evacuation of 54 Polish citizens on the same ship. He intentionally earmarked 45 spots for Jewish leaders, representing a range of political, social, and professional groupings, so that, in his words, they, in turn, might come to assist from abroad those left behind in Shanghai and help to facilitate their departure. Upon landing in Mozambique, my grandparents learned of my grandfather's appointment to the post of ambassador in the Soviet Union, the most difficult posting of all of his long career. But that, of course, is another chapter, another story. On a personal note, I called my grandfather Jadunyo and my grandmother Babunya when I was growing up in Montreal. I am one of 15 grandchildren of Tadeusz and Zofia Romer, 13 of whom are alive in Canada today, in Montreal, Ottawa, and Vancouver. The Romers had 3 daughters, and 2 are still alive. My mother, Teresa, the oldest, Renia, as she was known to family and friends, was born in 1926. As a matter of fact, she's celebrating her 99th birthday today, May 26th. My mother has been in the forefront of preserving my grandfather's memory, accomplishments, and legacy. Over the past 25 years, she's developed a wide range of contacts with academics in Poland, conducting research on the history of Polish-Japanese relations, with a Japanese-Canadian journalist in Vancouver, Aya Takahashi, that I believe Mr. Kitade works with closely, who writes about Sugihara visa recipients, a Dutch journalist writing about the Dutch connection, as well as the grandchildren of several Sugihara visa recipients in the Netherlands, in Canada, and the United States. In Poland, let me just click. In Poland, a young academic, Beata Szuptarska, has written a biography titled Unusual Missions, Tadeusz Romer, 1894-1978, Polish diplomat in a world of dictatorships and war. Unfortunately, this book is available only in Polish, but I assure you it does read like a novel. I was 28 when my grandfather passed away in 1978 in Montreal, followed by my grandmother 3 years later. I recall a most unassuming, discreet, and quiet man. He never discussed his impressive trajectory with us grandchildren, but we always knew that he was someone special who had helped to save Polish Jewish refugees. My mother, too, says that in Japan, she was a young teenager at the time. He kept work and home quite separate. One of the ways, however, in which we knew that he was special was that on his name's day or his birthday, he would receive cards and messages and flowers as tokens of appreciation and gratitude from people he had helped. My grandfather was an avid amateur photographer and an accomplished pianist as well. I was told that he would play the piano in the evenings after an intense day of work. On his various pre-war diplomatic postings and in his early days in Japan, he would take his favorite Zeiss Icon film camera on weekend excursions and vacations in the countryside, making beautiful black and white landscape photographs. In conclusion, Tadeusz Romer, my grandfather, supported by his wife Zofia and the embassy staff in Tokyo, oversaw a massive effort to help over 2,000 Polish Jewish refugees in a short time and in very challenging political and financial circumstances. He was undoubtedly guided by a sense of professional duty, but also by deeply held human and humanitarian values. He played a pivotal role in the lesser-known stage of the visas for life, when the recipients of the Sugihara transit visas reached Japan, escaping from likely death in the Holocaust and helping them chart a path to safety. So thank you very much for your attention. This last picture, I wanted to show it to you because my grandfather was also a fairly formal person. So here is my grandfather and my grandmother out on the hillside in the country in Canada, in Ontario, and yet he has a suit and his favorite bow tie. So, and with that, I will end my presentation and thank you very much. And of course, I'm prepared to take questions.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing your grandfather's incredible story. If anyone has questions, please feel free to add them to the chat box, and I would be happy to answer any questions. I do see there's one question here. Let me know if you could answer it. What type of help did the refugees receive from Jewish residents of Japan?
It was, well, there was financial, so the refugees also received some financial support through the committee. As I mentioned, there were donations as well from the Jewish community that went to the committee. But I think importantly, there was moral support and a connection. Of course, it made them feel welcome. There was accommodations in Kobe, particularly, is my understanding. But I think that the role that the Jewish community played was to support them morally and to support them as well on a personal level.
Okay. And how does it feel to share your grandfather's story? We often don't hear about all the diplomats that were involved in helping Jewish people during the Holocaust. So how does it feel to share your grandfather's story openly?
Well, I think it's very important to share it. I'm the next generation. As I mentioned, my mother did most of the sort of hard work. She was involved in transmitting his documents to the archives in Poland after 1990. How does it feel for me? It's very emotional. I knew that my grandfather had done special things, but I didn't know the extent to which all the details of the work that he did in Japan, and then later on in the Soviet Union, where he continued to help and support in his role as ambassador to support Polish refugees who had been deported to Siberia. So there were a lot of snippets. It was a story that sort of unraveled as I read more about him, as the biography came out. Remember that when my grandfather passed away in 1978, he of course had seen the Sugihara visas, but nobody talked about Sugihara then. It was the transit visas. So my grandfather, according to what my mother said and everything I've read, was not really aware of that it was Consul Sugihara who actually extended those visas. He knew that there was a consul that was stamping the visas, but he didn't know the name of Sugihara, just probably like Sugihara never knew about Romer or some of the other diplomats that helped. But coming back to your question, yes, it's personal, it's emotional, but I cherish every opportunity to share the story because I think it is an important one.
It is very important. And there's a question, are there any plans to translate the biography?
As usual for these things, it's a question of interest. It's a question of finding the publisher, and of course, it's a question of finding the financial means to do so. The family would very much like to have it translated. I'm not sure whether it will be or not, but some of your listeners may be interested in. There are there is an English publication that is available, and I would like to show this because this is, I don't know if you can see it there. It is a story. It's called "From the Crash of Empires and Polish Rebirth to the Dawn of Solidarność," and this was a conference organized in McGill in 2018 with the participation of Olga Barbasiewicz and Eva Pałasz-Rytkowska and some other specialists. And this publication is all in English. And many of the details that I spoke about tonight. Now, I believe that it is available at the Polish Library in Montreal. And if anybody is interested, I could share, Avital, the website with you, and you could share it, or I could put it in the post in the chat probably.
Yes, that would be great. We can
Yep.
share the book afterward.
Okay.
Okay, and there was one more question. Someone asked, how did your family come to Canada?
My grandfather and grandmother, with the two younger daughters, immigrated to Canada in 1947. This was after he resigned. After his posting in the Soviet Union, my grandfather was appointed the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the government in exile. But once it was clear that the communist regime, after the referendum of 47, that the communist regime took over Poland, there was no possibility for my grandfather to go back to Poland. And so he and his wife, with the two daughters, emigrated to Montreal, where he was hired by McGill University and taught French literature. And he also was active, of course, in Polish immigrant affairs in Montreal and presided over the Polish Institute of Arts and Sciences in Montreal.
Okay.
So, and then my family, so my mother married in England. I was actually born in England, and with my older sister, we came to Canada in 1950 to Montreal as well.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, those are all the questions we'll have for this evening. If there are any more questions, again, feel free to email Chris Simpson at csimpson@fswc.ca, both for Anna as well as Akira. They will be happy to answer any additional questions you may have. There will also be a recording, so we will send a link your way over email in case you want to share it with anybody. It will be on our YouTube channel at some point this week. So once again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Akira Kitade and Anna Nitoslawska. We are truly honored to have had the opportunity to shed light on the heroic efforts of Chiun Sugihara, Tadeusz Romer, and other diplomats who risk their lives risk so much to help Jewish people escape the horrors of the Holocaust. It's equally important that we continue to share the stories of those who lived through the dark chapter in history, stories of resilience, courage, and survival. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We look forward to welcoming you at our next event. Have a wonderful evening. And if you're in Japan, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avital, and your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.